Hello, doctor. My name is Dr. Eman, and I have a question. My question is that why neutrophils are first to arrive at the site of inflammation and why they are so abundant among other leukocytes.
Right. So your question is basically that when there is acute inflammation, why the neutrophils are the white blood cells which arrive not only first of all at the site of inflammation, but they arrive in big number. What is the real reason? Right? The real reason behind it, I will explain four reasons. First reason is that neutrophils are the most abundant white blood cells present in our circulatory system. Right? In our circulatory system, 50 to 70% of the leukocytes are basically neutrophils, right? This is one thing. And because they are in such a big number, when there is inflammation occur and white blood cell recruitment start, as neutrophils are in maximum number in the blood, so they have the chance to reach not only first of all but also in bigger number at the site of acute inflammation. But this is only first cause. Second cause is that neutrophils are the most mobile among the other white blood cells. For example, as compared to monocytes and lymphocytes and eosinophils and basophils, neutrophils are very, very mobile. Now, why neutrophils are so mobile? The reason for this is that cytoskeleton, right, which is present in the neutrophil, that is highly dynamic, right, under the influence of chemoattractants and other neutrophil activators, the cytoskeleton undergoes rapid changes, and due to those rapid changes, right, neutrophils can display amoeboid movements, right, and very rapid amoeboid movements as compared to other white blood cells like monocytes or macrophages. Of course, when monocytes come into tissue and become active, we call them macrophages. Neutrophils are far more mobile as compared to macrophages, lymphocytes, or eosinophils or basophils. So this is one reason of rapid mobility, right? That cytoskeleton is very dynamic, very active. It can undergo alterations, produce pseudopods, and very rapidly, you can say neutrophils can move towards the chemoattractants, right? But there's one more big thing. When neutrophils move, right, if there is obstruction on the way in the tissue, right, they produce lot of proteases. They're able to do proteolysis of surrounding tissue to produce tunnels in the tissue, right? And in this way, they are able to move more swiftly, right? So what did I say? That neutrophil can move very rapidly. One reason is due to their very dynamic cytoskeleton, which can rearrange itself under the directions of different stimulants, right? And they can undergo very rapid chemotactic action, or they can produce amoeboid movement. Second reason I told you that if there is hindrance of tissue on the way, neutrophils can produce different kind of enzymes. For example, neutrophils have many different types of proteolytic enzymes, so that they release those enzymes and digest the tissue, so that within the tissue they make the tunnels and move towards the site of acute injury. Due to these reasons, neutrophils can navigate through very, very complex microenvironments of different tissues. Third most important reason, we have discussed up to now two most important reasons. One was they are most abundant in circulation. That is why they reach first and in big number. Number two, they are most mobile among the all white blood cells. Number three, yes, it's very important. Number three is when there is acute injury, right? Either there is trauma or there is pyogenic bacteria producing toxins, or due to any reason tissue is damaged, right? Or microbes are there, microbial products are there. This inflammation produces a lot of chemical mediators, right? And some of these chemical mediators are very powerful chemoattractant to the neutrophils, but not to other white blood cells. Again, I will repeat, it's worth repeating that when acute injury occur, in the early phase of acute injury, very powerful chemoattractants are produced which attract neutrophil more strongly as compared to other white blood cells, right? So these chemoattractants which are having more strong action on neutrophils are produced in higher concentration and at early time of inflammation. Now, what are these chemoattractants? Actually, whenever injury occurs, many chemical mediators are produced, but I will just mention here those chemical mediators which are well known for attracting neutrophils. Number one, lipid mediators. Now, first of all, these mediators are coming from resident cell. Resident cell mean the cells which are already present at the site of injury, right? These resident cells include the mast cells. These include the resident macrophages or dendritic cells, or you can say any type of resident macrophages, and resident endothelial lining of local microvasculature. Now, when a tissue is injured, it means mast cells, resident macrophages, and local endothelial cells are first to produce different chemical mediators to attract the neutrophils. Now, these resident cells can produce some very powerful chemical mediators from their membrane lipids. For example, they can produce leukotriene B4, right? They can produce platelet activating factor, right? Both of them are lipid from the cell membrane's lipid derivative. Leukotrienes B4, which is a derivative from arachidonic acid metabolism via the lipoxygenase pathway, and platelet activating factor also. Both of them attract neutrophils. Then there can be some cytokines like tumor necrotic factor and interleukin 1, right? They can attract neutrophils. Then there are more, right? Especially I should mention some chemokines. Chemokines are a subfamily of cytokines which are specially and powerfully able to induce the chemotaxis. Chemotaxis mean directional movement, directional locomotion of neutrophil towards the focus of injury along the progressively increasing gradient of chemotactic agent. I will again repeat. What really happens that at the site of injury, some resident cell like mast cell, resident macrophages, and endothelial cells, they produce chemical mediators which specially attract the neutrophils more intensely than other white blood cells. For example, leukotriene B4 or platelet activating factors, which are derived from the phospholipids of the membrane, or tumor necrotic factor and interleukin 1, which are cytokines, they are also produced. And especially a very special name, I should mention about a group of a subfamily of cytokine which is called chemokines. Chemokines are small weight cytokines which are specially very active in inducing chemotaxis in neutrophils. Right? Now, what is chemotaxis? Chemotaxis is directional locomotion of neutrophil along the concentration gradient, right? Towards along the concentration gradient of chemotactic agents towards the focus of injury, right? So we can say that leukotriene, platelet activating factor, tumor necrotic factor, interleukin 1, chemokines, especially one of the chemokine which is too powerful to very powerful to stimulate the and attract the neutrophil is interleukin 8. Interleukin 8. So that is also produced at early phases of acute inflammation. So that will play a very big role in attracting the neutrophils specifically, right? Then if there are microbes present, if bacteria present, some of the bacterial product themselves can attract neutrophils. For example, formilated bacterial peptides, right? Bacteria have receptors for formilated bacterial peptides, and when formilated bacterial peptide interact with the receptors, that induces changes in cytoskeleton of the neutrophils, and neutrophils start moving towards the higher concentration of formilated bacterial peptide, right? So what did we learn up to now? Then I have mentioned three causes. Fourth is the most interesting, but I will just give you a brief review of first three causes. Our question was why neutrophils are the first responder at the site of acute inflammation, and why in such a big number, right? Especially during first 6 hour to 24 hour, there is intense neutrophil accumulation at the site of acute injury during first to 24 hours. Why? Number one, because neutrophils are most abundantly present in the circulatory system. Number two, they are the most mobile white blood cells. Number three, the chemoattractant or chemotactic agent for the neutrophils are produced first of all after the injury, in early initial phase, and in bigger and higher concentration. So neutrophils are more intensely attracted in the early phase of inflammation. And now the last cause, last but not the least, first wave of neutrophil arrive at the focus of injury due to chemical mediators or chemoattractant produced by the resident cell, like mast cell, resident neutrophils, and endothelium. But once the first wave of neutrophil has arrived, these neutrophils become primed and they become active, and they themselves start producing chemoattractant to call more neutrophil. It means when first wave of neutrophil reaches, it then not only local injured resident cell will keep on producing chemoattractants, but neutrophil which have arrived at the site of injury, they themselves start producing lot of chemical mediators to attract more neutrophils. So second wave of neutrophil will come. Then what will happen? Then local resident cell plus first wave neutrophils plus second wave neutrophil, all of them will be producing chemoattractant like leukotriene B4, platelet activating factor, complement C5a, or tumor necrotic factor interleukin 1, all of them, and especially we should not forget the most powerful chemoattractant for neutrophil is interleukin 8. So local resident cell, neutrophils of the first wave and neutrophil of the second wave, now all of them are producing chemoattractant for next wave of neutrophil. It means once neutrophils arrive, they give a call for more neutrophils. More neutrophil arrive, they give chemoattractive agent call for more neutrophils. So as we say, money begets money. In case of acute inflammation, neutrophils begets neutrophils. More neutrophils you have, more neutrophils are called upon, right? So due to these reasons, neutrophils are first of all to arrive at the site of acute inflammation, and they are in the biggest number as compared to other white blood cell to reach at the site of acute inflammation, right? So 4 reasons, again, remember, it's worth it. If someone asks, what are the cells of acute inflammation? You say mainly neutrophils, followed by macrophages. Macrophage follow the neutrophil after 24 to 48 hours. right? So what are the leukocytes of the acute inflammation? Cells of acute inflammation, classically we say first neutrophil in the initial phase, and if you want to be more elaborative, you can say after 24 to 48 hours, macrophages start coming, and after 72 hours or so, macrophages start dominating at the site of injury. Why it is so? Let's deal with this question also. Actually, even though neutrophils come first of all, even though neutrophils come in a big number, but neutrophils have one problem. They have short life. The lifespan is very short. So within few hours, or at the max in couple of days, neutrophils undergo apoptotic process or death process. They die at the site of acute inflammation. But before their death, local tissue and neutrophils start releasing chemoattractant for monocytes. So monocytes from the blood start extravasating and come into tissue, convert into macrophages. So what really happens? Even though initial waves of white blood cells were neutrophil, but as time passes by, tissue cells, injured tissue cells, and the neutrophils, they start producing chemoattractant for monocytes, and now waves of monocytes start approaching the site of inflammation. And of course, as you know, that when monocyte shift from vascular compartment to extravascular compartment, we call them macrophages. So we say there is arrival of macrophages, right? So you can say in first few hours you will see only neutrophil, but after, and this neutrophil aggregation at the site of focal injury will be this dominance of neutrophil will remain a peak at 24 hours, but around 48 hours or so many macrophages have also come. So around 48 hours of acute inflammation, you will find histopathologically there are neutrophils or macrophages both. But in most cases of acute inflammation, after 72 hours, macrophages start dominating. If someone asks you a question, why neutrophils arrived first, you have the answer. But if someone say, why macrophage come late, but why after a few days macrophages become dominant, answer to this is macrophage come late because now we compare arrival of the neutrophil and the macrophages. Neutrophil more mobile, macrophage less mobile. Neutrophil more abundant, so first come and abundantly come. Macrophages are less abundant. Due to less mobility and being less abundant, they take longer time to accumulate at the site of acute inflammation. Third very important reason, the chemoattractant for neutrophils are produced earlier and in higher concentration. And neutrophil response is very intense and active. But chemoattractant for macrophages are produced with some delay, but they are produced for prolonged time, right? So macrophages arrival is delayed, but for longer time, extravasation and tissue infiltration of macrophages continues. But now comes the most important point. Why after few days, after 72 hours, neutrophil dominance become less in most of the cases and macrophage dominance become more? Answer is the neutrophil lifespan is very short, right? And once they reach at the acute inflammatory site, they undergo apoptotic process, apoptosis, within few hours, max in couple of days. But macrophages have a long lifespan. So even they are late to arrive, even the macrophages are slow to arrive, but because their lifespan is long, they keep on accumulating, right? So as acute inflammation time passes, the nature of cellular infiltrate of the leukocyte changes. In the beginning, mostly neutrophils. Then after 1 or 2 days or 3 days, neutrophils with macrophages. Then more days pass, macrophages become more dominant. And should I tell you something more interesting? Even when more days passes and acute inflammation does not resolve, then macrophages and tissue cell will start producing chemoattractant for lymphocytes. So what happened? Then waves of lymphocytes will come. Then something very funny will occur. Macrophage will be calling more lymphocytes, and lymphocytes reach at the site of the injury and call more macrophages. So it's strange kind of love affair that the real sufferer were the neutrophil, which came first of all and died first of all. Macrophage came late, but they stayed. First macrophage keep on calling more and more macrophages. Then macrophages started calling lymphocytes. Then lymphocytes which reach at the site of injury, they call more macrophages. So what happens? When acute inflammation, very late time, is when acute inflammation, you can say, is converting it into chronic inflammation, the nature of the aggregated cells in the tissue changes. In the beginning, mostly neutrophil, then 2-3 days neutrophil plus macrophages, then more days macrophages and few lymphocytes, far more days lot of macrophages and lot of lymphocytes. So this is how histopathology changes at the site of acute inflammation as time passes by and acute inflammation is converting into chronic inflammation. Thank you very much. And if you want to have a crystal clear concept, you can watch my video lectures. And of course, don't forget, I love you all. Bye-bye.